Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. The UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency's head says airdrops won't reverse the starvation in Gaza. Israel claims foreign nations can send supplies via airdrop, but the UNRWA chief calls it insufficient and demands political will to ensure safe aid delivery. Fighting on the Thai-Cambodian border enters a third day with both sides claiming self-defense. More than 30 people have died and over 130,000 people have been displaced in the worst conflict between the neighbours in 13 years. US President Donald Trump plays golf in Scotland under tight security on the first day of his visit. Hundreds of protesters gathered near his Turnberry resort as his trip faces political and public scrutiny. At least 6 people, including law enforcement, were killed in a, quote, terrorist attack on a judicial building in southeast Iran. 3 gunmen were also reported dead in the incident. 5 people have been killed in overnight drone strikes between Russia and Ukraine. 3 died in Ukraine's Dnipropetrovsk region, while 2 others were killed in Russia's Rostov after a drone strike. Thousands rallied in Kuala Lumpur demanding the resignation of Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. Protesters wearing black and carrying "Step Down Anwar" slogans gathered in Independence Square amid growing discontent over rising living costs and broken reform promises. Pope Leo met with Metropolitan Antony, a senior Russian Orthodox cleric, in an effort to ease church ties strained by the Ukraine war. The pontiff held an audience with Antony and 5 other high-profile clerics, according to the Vatican. Taiwan opposition lawmakers have survived a major recall election, thwarting a bid to oust 1/5 of parliament. All recall votes against lawmakers from the KMT were rejected, according to live vote counts. Now we start this hour with Middle East diplomacy, where British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has announced plans to move forward with a Gaza food airdrop. His office confirmed discussions with French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. The plan will work with partners including Jordan to deliver essential aid and evacuate sick children needing medical care. Starmer emphasised the urgency of the humanitarian crisis, agreeing with Macron and Merz that robust ceasefire plans are crucial for lasting peace. This follows global outrage over rising starvation in Gaza. Aid has been restricted due to Israel's blockade amid the ongoing conflict with Hamas. We're now joined by Yossi Kapawassa, who is an Israeli intelligence and security expert. He joins us live from Tel Aviv. Yossi, thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure having you on the program. I just want to first raise some certain issues that have been faced in the past. Israel is now allowing aid to be dropped from planes into the Gaza Strip. However, history tells us that previous airdrops in 2024 led to fatalities, including 5 were killed by failed parachutes and others drowning trying to receive packages from the sea. Why has Israel chosen this method to be allowed after widespread calls for aid, unrestricted aid access into the Gaza Strip?
First of all, we didn't choose this system of delivering aid. We much prefer to deliver aid by trucks. And we don't think this is that necessary to drop them from the air. This was a request of the British and other countries, and we listened to this request, but it's not that we asked for that. What happens on the ground is that we have intensified the number of trucks that are coming in. As a matter of fact, a lot of the kitchens that are taking advantage of these trucks full of load of supplies are processing have resumed their activity in the Gaza Strip. And I don't think that the airdrops is so necessary. But okay, if somebody wants to show that they are doing something extraordinary, let them do that. There's enough food, and there's a lot of 250 trucks were entering Gaza today. It's a huge number, and there are so many trucks that are still waiting to be delivered to the Gazan population that there's no shortage of food. The problem is with the distribution, not with the amount of food available.
Yossi, that contradicts certain reports that are coming out of the region that we're getting reports of catastrophic hunger and deaths of malnutrition from the region on a daily basis now. Around 9%, the UN reports, of children under the, people under the age of 18 are at risk of dying of malnutrition in the Gaza Strip. What does Israel say about that?
Well, we are admitting that there are problems of supplying the food and the other kinds of aid in Gaza. These were caused by Hamas and by the UN agencies who refused to deliver the supplies of humanitarian aid that are already inside Gaza. And that's in part of their malfunctioning, and part of it is because they want to protest against the efforts of Israel to supply aid directly to the population, not through the UN agencies or through the Hamas that controls the UN agencies. And that's what it's a political issue, and it's a very well orchestrated campaign that in the meanwhile, some people do suffer because of this campaign. This is a pity, and we are trying to bring in as much food as possible to make sure that this phenomena is going to disappear as soon as possible. We don't want to see anybody suffering.
Yes, Yossi Kapawasa, thank you for joining us. Please stay with us as we discuss further updates. The head of the UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini, has called planned airdrops into Gaza an ineffective distraction that could kill starving Palestinians. This comes as Israel had said earlier that it will allow airdrops of food and supplies from foreign countries into Gaza in the coming days in response to critical food shortages caused by its blockade. In a social media post, Lazzarini said that the airdrops won't reverse the deepening starvation in Gaza and instead called for the lifting of the siege in the enclave. Lazzarini also called upon Israel to allow UN and its partners to operate at a scale in Gaza without bureaucratic or political hurdles. We're now once again joined by Yossi Kapawasa. Yossi, the United Nations still wants to deliver aid into Gaza. Israel has said that it won't let the organisation into the Gaza Strip. People are asking why. What can you say about this?
Well, first of all, we do allow them to operate there for the time being. And the problem is that the UNRWA are very closely cooperating with Hamas. And we have found that many of their people were in part of the 7th of October attack. And that's why we are so upset with what they're doing, but we still allow them to operate. And we think that in the longer run, that's what they complain about. In the longer run, we should find a way to deliver aid not through UNRWA. And that's the point where we disagree. And regarding the lifting of the sanction, lifting of the siege and all of that, we have come with an offer for a ceasefire that was supposed to come into effect long ago. And Hamas is the one that refuses to accept the ceasefire. And that's why we have the continuation of the war. We could have had a ceasefire by now, long ago, as I said. And I think that President Trump has referred to that and said that it seems that Hamas doesn't want a ceasefire and wants to go dead.
Yossi, in regards to the statement that you've made saying that there was some UNRWA members directly associated with Hamas, yes, that is true. 9 individuals were implicated, but they have now been implicated, suspended or fired. Why should these 9 individuals be responsible for the reported starving, malnutritional deaths of the 2 million people in Gaza?
No, this has nothing to do with the starvation and the hunger of people. That's something totally different. First of all, there's a question, who is UNRWA and on what side they are? And unfortunately, their mission in life is to perpetuate the suffering of the Palestinians and to continue the teaching of the Palestinians that eventually they are going to get rid of Israel and make it disappear. This is the education that they provide, and this is the people that man the organization. It's not only the 9 that were proven to be involved in the attack. Many others are members of Hamas and support Hamas, and there are close relationships between Hamas and UNRWA. That's one story. Put that aside. Now there's a question of delivering the aid. And that's something different, that in spite of our problems with UNRWA, we allow the UN to be involved in delivering aid in the northern part of Gaza. And unfortunately, they do not perform properly. And this causes much of the problems with the aid distribution. Much of the aid goes into the hands of Hamas. And this makes it difficult for people that need the aid to get it. It's not that we do not allow them to get the aid. We bring in a lot of trucks full of supplies, and they just don't distribute it properly.
Okay, Yossi Kapawasa, thank you. You are staying with us once again to discuss more updates. Now we move on. An internal US government analysis has found no evidence of systemic theft by Hamas of US-funded humanitarian supplies, challenging the main rationale of the US and Israel for backing private aid operations. The analysis was conducted by a bureau within the US Agency for International Development and was completed in late June. According to reports, USAID found no report of alleging that Hamas benefited from US-funded supplies. However, a US State Department spokesman disputed the findings, stating that there is no video evidence of Hamas looting aid, but also offered no proof. This comes as Israel has said that it is committed to allowing aid into the enclave, but must control it to prevent it from being stolen by Hamas. The UN World Food Programme has sounded the alarm and said that nearly a quarter of Gaza's population face famine-like conditions. We are once again joined by Yossi Kapawasa to discuss this further. Yossi, does Israel accept the credibility of this US aid review, or does it believe the State Department's unverified claim, of course, of video evidence, which has not been made public so far, I just want to say that, is more reliable than a detailed internal investigation?
Well, I don't know if there is any formal Israeli response to that, but in my mind, the credibility of this report is questionable. First of all, we all saw so many times when the trucks came in full of supplies that Hamas armed people jumped on the trucks and took them and took control of them. That was seen so many times. I don't know what kind of proof they're looking for. Discussing the issue with Hamas in order to hear from them that they are looting. It's ridiculous. We saw it. Everybody saw it with their own eyes. So it's what other proof they need. And on top of that, USAID has been cooperating with the Palestinians for a long time, and to the point where the Trump administration has decided to close this organization. So there's a reason to be questionable about the credibility of this report, and even the State Department themselves don't accept this report. So I don't know what is the Israeli response, but I, as an expert on the reliability of these reports, have my questions.
Yossi Kapawasa, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Always a pleasure to have you on. We now move over to the east now, where Taiwan voters rejected a massive recall effort targeting 24 opposition lawmakers from the nationalist KMT party. This deals a blow to the ruling Democratic Progressive Party's plan to flip the legislature. The KMT holds a slight lead with 52 seats to the DPP's 51. Another recall vote is now set for August the 23rd. The results show a strong support for democracy and stability amid high tensions over Taiwan's future and China's influence. Official results are due on August the 1st. Now we're joined by Ross Feingold, who is a political risk analyst. He joins us live from the Taiwanese capital of Taipei. Thank you, Ross, for joining us. once again on the program. Ross, what can you tell us about the feeling in Taiwan right now, and why is this such an important day for the legislature in the country? What more information can you give us on this recall?
An important thing to keep in mind is that today's result is in large part an expression by the voters that they like divided government. They don't want the executive branch and the legislative branch to be controlled by the same party. They voted for that 2 times. They voted for that in 2016 and they voted for that in 2020, but they didn't vote for that in 2024. And the recall came across as an effort to overturn the results of the 2024 election. So again, the voters have expressed their desire, based on today's result, that there is an opposition-controlled legislature that could exercise oversight over the executive branch. Of course, there are going to be people who say that today's result was because of undue influence from China. China had expressed its opposition to the recall, or in other words, China had expressed its support for a no vote, and the no vote did win today. So certainly there's going to be some commentary in the coming hours and days that says this is all due to the influence of China. But I would push back on that and say that this was for the most part about local issues, and it was about local democracy and local governance. And again, the voters expressed their desire that they didn't want the same party to control both the executive and legislative branches.
Ross, the KMT now holds a fragile majority in the legislature. How might this shape Taiwan's domestic agenda, especially when it comes to national security, cross-strait relations, and defense spending?
That's a great question. So the Chinese Nationalist Party, or Kuomintang, KMT as it's often called, they have a slight majority, and when combined with a smaller opposition party called the Taiwan People's Party, which has 8 seats, they form a majority. And that makes it very difficult for the executive branch, controlled by President Lai's Democratic Progressive Party, to get its agenda through the legislature. It means that there has to be negotiations, there has to be agreement, and the opposition-controlled legislature is not always going to agree with what the executive branch wants. And you know what? That's just the nature of democracy, and that's what sometimes happens in democratic countries. Like I said, the voters have expressed their desire for now to have divided government. But certainly it will make things difficult for President Lai. He has a little less than 3 years remaining on his first term. Like any first president, he wants a second term. First-term president, he wants a second term. The next election is in January 2028. But the upcoming few years are going to continue to see extraordinary difficult relations between the executive and legislative branches of government.
Ross Feingold, you are staying with us as we move over to Europe for our next story, where Ukraine has claimed its long-range drones targeted and hit an electronic warfare plant in Russia's Stavropol region. The SBU security service confirmed that 2 facilities at the signal plant were damaged, halting production of critical military equipment. Ukraine continues to focus on drone attacks to weaken Russia's military capabilities. Meanwhile, this comes as Russia announced the seizure of 2 villages in central Ukraine, including one in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Despite the ongoing clashes, both sides continue heavy bombardments. We're once again joined by Ross Feingold. Ross, with Ukraine increasingly striking deep into Russia, but also, of course, with Russia claiming new territory, are we seeing the war enter a new phase, one defined by a long-range escalation and grinding ground advances?
When it comes to the long-range escalation, the reality is this is something that the European governments and the United States government, certainly under President Biden, have struggled with. What kind of green light to give Ukraine to strike targets deeper within Russia? And when President Trump came into office, there's been some change. There hasn't been as much of a green light as the Biden administration had given, although that seems to be changing a bit with the recent agreement that the United States would sell weapons to Europe, which would then gift them to Ukraine. But again, this is something that Ukraine's supporters have struggled with. Now, at the same time, Ukraine has been building up its own capability to manufacture drones and use those drones to hit deeper into Russia. And if it's Ukrainian manufactured drones, then they're not under the restrictions that would apply to weapons that Western European countries or the United States have gifted to Ukraine. But going forward, this is certainly going to be an issue that the Western governments continue to struggle with, what kind of green light to give to Ukraine. As far as the Russian advance in recent hours and the capture of additional Ukrainian towns, this is all about changing the facts on the ground for Russia going into any ceasefire talks. Russia wants to control as much Ukrainian territory as possible, and then in those talks, they're going to say to Ukraine, you have to take it or leave it. What we control on the ground as of the moment, that's where the ceasefire line will be. So Russia is heavily incentivized to take as much territory as possible in the coming days and weeks.
Ross, as this war drags on, how is the international appetite for supporting Ukraine evolving?
To be fair to the European countries, they've remained united on this issue for over 3 years, and the statements and the actions that they take, whether that's the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Poland, the actions they continue to take shows that they remain united on providing financial aid as well as military aid to Ukraine. Again, they're struggling with what the Trump administration's approach will be. There was pauses on weapons deliveries from the United States. There's the recent agreement for the U.S. to sell weapons to Europe, which would be gifted to Ukraine. But the U.S., under President Trump, is still reluctant to directly gift weapons to Ukraine. But again, when it comes to Europe, they remain united. And that's something that clearly Ukraine is relying on, that if they can't count on the Trump administration, at least for now, they're going to continue to count on Europe. And that has a heavy influence on Ukraine's approach in peace talks or ceasefire talks. And for now, Ukraine is continuing to take a very tough position in those negotiations.
Ross Feingold, absolute pleasure as always. We now move on to our next story, where Pope Leo has taken a new step towards bridging divides between the Vatican and the Russian Orthodox Church. He met with Metropolitan Antony, a senior Russian Orthodox cleric, along with 5 other high-ranking figures. The Vatican confirmed the meeting, but didn't give any details. The Pope has called for global peace and told Ukraine's President Zelensky that he's willing to host talks. However, Russia has dismissed the idea, saying the Vatican's location inside NATO-backed Italy makes it biased. Earlier this year, the Pope also urged Putin to seek an end to the war. The head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill, has also strongly supported the invasion. We now move over to the Middle East, where at least 9 people have been killed in a deadly attack on a courthouse in Iran's restive Sistan-Baluchistan province. The Sunni terror group Jaish al-Adl has claimed responsibility for the assault in Zehdan. 3 of the assailants died in the attack, while 22 others were injured. A toddler, a 60-year-old woman, and several security personnel were among the dead. The attackers reportedly wore explosive vests and carried grenades. Jaish al-Adl says it targeted judges involved in death sentences against Bulaq citizens. The group threatened further violence against Iranian judicial staff. The region is home to the Sunni Bulaq minority, who say they face discrimination and marginalization. Tehran blames armed groups in the region for ties to foreign states and cross-border insurgencies. We're now joined by Irina Sukerman, who's a senior journalist. She joins us live from New York to discuss this developing story. Irina, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Irina, what more can you tell us about what we know about the group that perpetrated this terror attack, and of course about the developing situation in the Baluchistan province?
Jaish al-Adl is a group of militants that in the past has been operating in this region, but more recently they've been ramping up both the frequency and sophistication of the attacks. By more recent, I mean over the past year, they don't just target traditional military targets, they are also going after symbols of state power, judges, RGC officers, and intelligence compounds, and doing so in daylight in population centers with what appears to be a minimal fear of consequences, signaling confidence and potential external safe havens across the border in Pakistan or Afghanistan. Iran appears to be unable to prevent these attacks or to retaliate effectively, which undermines its narrative of internal stability projects abroad. And its response has been doubly ineffective because instead it's going after the Baluchis, which make up the majority of the ethnicity residing in that region, through collective punishments, which included sweeping crackdowns in local neighborhoods, arresting local activists, human rights activists, and raiding homes, imposing de facto martial law. Now, Balochistan has been known for both apparent lawlessness, smuggling activities, sometimes drug smuggling, and assorted forms of contraband, and also fiercely independent sentiment among much of its population. At the same time, they have suffered from discrimination, crackdowns, and even discriminatory narratives from both the Iranian regime and from Pakistan government. The heavy-handed approach applied by the Iran regime added to resentment and recruitment for militant groups such as Jaish al-Adl, which by no means is the only one. Rather than isolating extremists, the regime is driving moderate Baloch communities into their arms, and this latest development, an attack on a courthouse, is exposing the widening cracks in the Islamic Republic's control over its volatile southeastern frontier. The Iranian officials labeled this incident a terrorist operation because there were civilians harmed, including a child and an elderly woman. They are framing the incident as a one-off tragedy, but the reality points to a far more dangerous trend. Insurgency in this region is no longer sporadic, but strategic, coordinated, and increasingly symbolic. The assailants reportedly posed as civilians, entered the courthouse in Zahedan, and launched grenades and small arms fires directly into judicial offices. It wasn't about accumulating as many casualties as possible as it is, for instance, for ISIS or Al-Qaeda. It was more of a direct message to the Iranian judiciary and the security establishment. Zahedan is not simply a provincial capital, it's an epicenter of the long-running struggle between the Shia clerical elite of Iran and the Sunni Baluchi minority. So the institution of the courthouse is most closely associated with the regime's repression in the region, so it was not an accident that it was chosen as a target.
Irina Sukerman, thank you very much for your insight on that topic. Always a pleasure to have you on the programme. However, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you very much.